He laughed while signing the divorce papers, until the black judge read out my bank balance. He was laughing so loudly while signing the divorce papers that even the court clerk looked uncomfortable. But his smile snapped in half the moment the black judge read out my bank balance. His lawyer whispered, "Just sign. She's leaving with nothing." His mother smirked and said, "She should be grateful we're letting her walk away at all." They thought this was my humiliation. Welcome back, my beautiful family. Today's story is going to be like never before. If this story doesn't make your day, I will personally apologize to you if you drop your comment. Meanwhile, let me know where you are watching from, and please do well to subscribe. Thanks. I didn't marry into wealth, I married into arrogance. For years, I had navigated the polished halls of the Lane estate, a silent shadow in a world of booming voices and ostentatious displays. My husband, Julian, treated my kindness like a doormat, an invitation for his casual cruelty. Every gentle gesture, every empathetic response was met with a dismissive wave or a sharp, condescending remark. His world was a gilded cage, and I, for a long time, had been the silent bird, fluttering against bars that seemed invisible to everyone but me. He saw my quiet nature not as strength, but as a lack of fight, a deficiency that justified his relentless belittling. His mother, Eleanor, perfected the art of the subtle jab, calling me the charity case wife at family gatherings, her voice dripping with syrupy sweetness that did nothing to mask the venom beneath. She'd always managed to make me feel like an interloper, a stray cat that had somehow wandered into their pedigreed kennel. They mocked my small cleaning business, a venture I'd poured my heart and meager savings into, saying I'd die broke. A pronouncement Julian would often echo with a sardonic chuckle, usually after a particularly lucrative deal for his own floundering tech startup. My business, Clear Horizons, was more than just a means to an end. It was my sanctuary, a place where hard work was respected and results spoke louder than inherited surnames. I took pride in every sparkling surface, every meticulously organized space. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest, and it was mine. While Julian chased fleeting trends and inflated valuations, I was building something tangible, brick by painstaking brick, even if no one in his family truly saw it. The only one who ever spoke to me with a genuine warmth, a flicker of respect, was his uncle Arthur. A quiet man with a gentle gaze, he rarely attended the boisterous, self-congratulatory family events. When he did, he would often seek me out, offering a kind word, a shared look of understanding across the opulent yet emotionally barren dining table. I didn't know then that he was a retired judge with more power than they imagined, a quiet observer whose wisdom ran far deeper than the superficial chatter of the Lane dynasty. Arthur was an anomaly in their world of calculated moves and social climbing. He moved with a quiet dignity, his presence a balm in the storm of their egos. I remember one summer afternoon tending to the roses in the estate garden when he approached me. He spoke of the importance of roots, of tending to what truly matters, his words a stark contrast to the family's obsession with external appearances. He was the only one who seemed to see beyond my role as Julian's wife, who saw me. I cherished those rare, unsolicited conversations, glimpses into a world where empathy wasn't a weakness, but a profound strength. On our 5th anniversary, a lavish affair Julian insisted on hosting despite the growing chasm between us, he stood before his assembled family, a glass of champagne in hand, his gaze sweeping over me with an almost triumphant disdain. "She thinks loyalty will make her rich," he announced, his voice carrying just enough for me to hear over the clinking of glasses. "Watch me walk out and still take everything." A chorus of appreciative murmurs and toasts followed, a chilling affirmation of their collective disdain. They toasted to it, right in front of me, as if I were a mere prop in their celebratory spectacle of power and entitlement. My hands clenched in my lap, my smile fixed and brittle, a performance of composure that cost me every ounce of inner strength I possessed. The champagne tasted like ash in my mouth. That night, I cried silently into my pillow, not for the loss of love which had long since evaporated, but for the profound loneliness of being so utterly unseen, so utterly undervalued. A cold resolve began to solidify within me, harder and sharper than any diamond in Eleanor's vast collection. 2 weeks later, as if a silent prayer had been answered, Arthur visited me privately. He found me in the kitchen, meticulously polishing the silver that Julian rarely even noticed. He didn't say much, just observed me for a moment with that knowing gaze. Then, he handed me a sealed, unmarked envelope, heavy with an unspoken significance. "You won't understand now," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Just don't lose it." There was no explanation, no hint of what it contained, only the profound weight of his words. I remember the smooth, cool texture of the paper beneath my fingers, a strange comfort in its mystery. I put it in a drawer in my bedside table, a forgotten relic in the turbulent landscape of my marriage, until the divorce filing came. That envelope, a quiet promise from a quiet man, lay dormant, waiting for its moment to awaken. Have you ever experienced a moment where you felt completely underestimated? And how did that feeling shape your actions moving forward? Share your thoughts in the comments below. When my husband served me papers demanding half my business income, the house and monthly alimony, a strange stillness settled over me. I didn't cry. The expected flood of tears, the despair I thought would consume me, simply didn't arrive. Instead, a cold, clear focus descended. It was as if the shock had cauterized all the superficial wounds, leaving only a hard, unyielding core. This wasn't just about property or money. This was about dignity, about the silent years of being dismissed, undermined, and treated as if my very existence was a concession. Julian's demands weren't just legal maneuvers. They were a final, desperate attempt to erase me, to prove that his contempt was justified, that I was, indeed, nothing without him. The paper in my hand, crisp with the judge's seal, felt like a gauntlet thrown down, not a surrender. My first thought, surprisingly, wasn't fear, but a flicker of a long, dormant spark. I remembered Arthur's words, his quiet intensity, the simple weight of that sealed envelope. It was still in the drawer, untouched, a silent sentinel of a promise I hadn't yet understood. I walked to the bedroom, my footsteps echoing unnaturally loud in the once grand, now hollow house. My fingers traced the intricate carving on the drawer pull before I opened it. There it was, unassuming, waiting. The paper felt different now, charged with a new significance. I didn't open it immediately. First, I made a call. It wasn't a random search, but a name that had always been whispered with reverence in the legal circles Julian's family occasionally brushed against. A name I'd heard Arthur mention once years ago in a fleeting comment about an exceptionally astute attorney. I found her number, tucked away in an old, leather-bound directory I'd inherited from my grandmother. Her name was Ms. Evelyn Reed, and her reputation preceded her, sharp, uncompromising, and known for her strategic brilliance. When I finally reached her, her voice was calm, measured, devoid of the condescension I'd grown so accustomed to. "Mrs. Lane," she said, her tone professional, "tell me everything." With Evelyn on board, I finally opened the envelope. Inside were not legal documents, but a series of cryptic instructions, handwritten notes, and a secure digital key. There was also a letter from Arthur, his familiar, elegant script filling the page. It wasn't addressed to me, but to my dear Evelyn, detailing a trust, an investment, and a meticulous long-term plan. He had been quietly observing, planning, building a fortress around me for years. My small cleaning business, Clear Horizons, wasn't just mine. Arthur had been a silent partner, a strategic investor, injecting capital and expertise, transforming it from a modest local service into a sophisticated property management and rental company, with my name as the 70% owner. The house, the very one Julian was now demanding, had been quietly paid off and transferred into my name 6 months prior, a silent transaction orchestrated by Arthur, a guardian angel I hadn't known I had. And then there was the trust from his personal estate bearing my name, explicitly excluding Julian. My stomach clenched, not with fear, but with a profound sense of awe and a surging, incandescent fury at the sheer audacity of Julian and his family's assumption of my helplessness. The day of the divorce court dawned cold and gray, mirroring the bleakness in my heart, yet a strange calm hummed beneath my skin. Julian showed up in a tailored suit, a picture of arrogant confidence. He leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips, occasionally sharing a whispered joke with his lawyer, who reciprocated with a hearty, booming laugh. His mother, Eleanor, sat directly behind him, her gaze a laser beam of contempt fixed on me. I could hear her hushed comments, sharp as shards of glass. "She'll leave with her dignity and a bus ticket," followed by a condescending titter. They were a united front of dismissal, their laughter and whispers a psychological assault, designed to break my composure, to make me crack. But I had spent years being broken, and now, strangely, I felt whole, armored by a resolve forged in silence and unseen strength. The courtroom was a sterile, unforgiving space, all hushed tones and formal procedures. The judge, a formidable black woman with an air of quiet authority, listened patiently to Julian's lawyer lay out their demands, a confident recitation of assets they presumed were rightfully Julian's. He spoke of my modest business, barely acknowledging its existence beyond a brief mention, painting a picture of a wife who had contributed little, a parasite clinging to the family's success. Julian watched me, his eyes gleaming with a malicious satisfaction, expecting me to crumble. He even leaned forward at one point, his voice a low, taunting whisper across the aisle. "Going to cry, darling? Save it for the bus ride." I met his gaze, not with tears, but with a steady, unblinking silence. Evelyn, my attorney, sat beside me, her posture erect, her expression unreadable. She hadn't said a word, letting Julian's team exhaust their bluster. The air in the room grew heavy with unspoken expectations, with the history of a marriage unraveling, and with the palpable tension of a battle about to shift dramatically. The moment of truth, the pivot point of my life, was rapidly approaching. Just as the judge prepared to finalize Julian's proposed settlement, a settlement that would have left me stripped bare, Evelyn stood. Her movement was graceful, deliberate, drawing all eyes to her. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm, but resonated with an undeniable authority that cut through the lingering echoes of Julian's lawyer's booming pronouncements. "Your Honor," she began, her gaze unwavering, "there is a sealed addendum to be reviewed before this proceeding continues." Julian scoffed, a loud, derisive sound that broke the courtroom's decorum. "She has nothing to add," he sneered, his voice laced with venom, "except tears." He chuckled, convinced of his imminent victory, oblivious to the seismic shift about to occur beneath his feet. His mother nodded in agreement, a smug expression plastered across her face, whispering, "Such a drama queen." They still saw me as the same meek woman, the charity case wife, incapable of strategy, incapable of defiance. They had no idea that the silent woman before them was about to unleash years of meticulously planned retribution. How often do we mistake silence for weakness, and what power can be found in strategic patience? Share your thoughts below. Julian's scoff echoed in the courtroom, an abrupt, crude sound that seemed to hang in the air, defiant of the solemn atmosphere. His mother's smug nod was a mirror image of his arrogance, a silent, venomous agreement. They were so utterly convinced of their narrative, my weakness, my insignificance, that the concept of a sealed addendum was merely a delay tactic, a last gasp of a desperate woman. This was their show, their stage, and I was merely the backdrop against which their triumph would be displayed. They resisted the very notion that I could possess anything of substance, anything that could challenge their carefully constructed reality. But then, the large oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung open, and the rhythm of their confident posturing shattered. All heads turned. Julian's older sister Victoria swept in, a second attorney trailing in her wake. Victoria, with her perfectly coiffed blonde hair and designer suit, exuded an air of entitled indignation. Her eyes immediately found mine, narrowed into hostile slits. Her presence was a calculated escalation, a display of familial solidarity designed to further intimidate and overwhelm. She marched to a seat beside Julian, her new lawyer whispering fiercely in her ear, and then, with a dramatic flourish, he stood. "Your Honor," Victoria's lawyer announced, his voice booming with feigned outrage, "my client, Ms. Victoria Lane, asserts that she has a claim for damages incurred by the emotional distress and familial discord caused by this marriage. She believes a portion of the marital assets should be allocated to her for the restoration of the Lane family's peace and reputation." It was an absurd, audacious claim, a transparent attempt to further diminish any potential settlement for me. They were practically dividing imaginary assets in advance, confident that whatever crumbs I received, they would take even more. Their greed was boundless, their contempt for me absolute. Julian leaned back, a satisfied smirk now replacing his earlier scoff, believing this was the final nail in my coffin. Eleanor gave a tiny, triumphant nod. The judge, however, simply raised an eyebrow, a subtle shift in her expression that spoke volumes. Her gaze, which had been patient, now held a hint of something sharper, almost imperceptible to anyone not paying close attention. It was a silent challenge, a demand for substance over bluster. She acknowledged Victoria's lawyer with a curt nod, but her eyes returned to Evelyn, signaling that it was her turn. Before Evelyn could respond to this new brazen attack, the courtroom doors opened once more. This time the entrance was quieter, less theatrical, yet far more impactful. My ex's uncle Arthur, the quiet man nobody respected, the man who had always been a peripheral figure in their grandiose lives, walked in. He held a simple, well-worn leather folder in his hand, his posture upright, his expression unreadable. He moved with a calm, assured presence that instantly commanded a different kind of attention than Victoria's dramatic entrance. The judge, whose stern demeanor had remained mostly unbroken throughout the proceedings, offered him a brief, almost imperceptible nod of familiarity, a gesture that spoke volumes. It wasn't just a recognition, it was a greeting between equals, between individuals who moved in the same rarefied circles of genuine influence and authority. The entire room went silent. It was a silence unlike any before it, not a hushed expectation but a sudden, stark realization. Julian's triumphant smirk dissolved. His laughter died in his throat. Eleanor, who moments before had been whispering her malicious commentaries, went utterly, starkly pale, her eyes widening with a dawning horror. Victoria's lawyer, who had been so quick to stand and grandstand, slowly, almost instinctively, sat down without being told, his face etched with a dawning apprehension. The air crackled with a new, unforeseen energy, heavy with the weight of consequence. The comfortable certainty that had enveloped Julian and his family for so long began to crack. They resisted this new reality with every fiber of their being. Julian's eyes darted between Arthur and the judge, a flicker of panic replacing his arrogance. He opened his mouth, as if to speak, to dismiss Arthur as irrelevant, to assert his dwindling authority, but no sound came out. Eleanor clutched her expensive handbag, her knuckles white. The carefully constructed facade of their invincibility was beginning to crumble, revealing the raw, unadulterated fear beneath. Arthur, however, remained an oasis of calm. He walked directly to Evelyn, exchanged a brief, quiet word, and then took a seat in the gallery, his presence a silent, undeniable force. The judge then turned her attention fully to Evelyn. "Ms. Reed," she stated, her voice clear and precise, "you mentioned a sealed addendum." Evelyn, with a serene confidence, retrieved a thick document from her brief, its edges crisp and official. "Indeed, Your Honor. This addendum, facilitated by Mr. Arthur Lane, contains crucial information regarding the financial and marital agreements between the parties, as well as several documented irregularities that bear heavily on the requested settlement." She handed the document to the bailiff, who in turn presented it to the judge. The judge accepted it, her eyes briefly meeting Arthur's, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. As her gaze scanned the opening pages, her expression shifted, her brow furrowing slightly. Julian leaned forward, an almost desperate curiosity overcoming his earlier disdain, but he remained silent, trapped by the unfolding drama. Eleanor shifted uneasily in her seat, her earlier smugness replaced by a visible tremor of anxiety. They were witnessing a play they hadn't rehearsed, a script they didn't write, and for the first time, they were not in control. The resistance was palpable, a desperate clinging to a past where I was powerless and they were untouchable. But the tide was already turning, slowly, irrevocably, towards a truth they vehemently wished to deny. What does true power look like? And how can quiet presence sometimes be more impactful than loud aggression? Share your thoughts below. The air in the courtroom, already thick with tension, now crackled with an almost unbearable silence as the judge began to read. Her voice, measured and deliberate, was the only sound, each word a hammer blow against the crumbling edifice of Julian's perceived invincibility. Julian, Eleanor, and Victoria were bound by the circumstances, trapped in a room where their past actions were about to be laid bare, forced to confront a reality they had so confidently dismissed. Their reluctance to accept any truth that challenged their dominion was palpable. Their faces were a study in denial, fear, and a dawning, sickening realization. The judge opened the sealed documents. The first item she read aloud sent a visible tremor through Julian. Exhibit A. A revised prenuptial contract, signed by both parties, and notarized 3 years prior to the date of separation. Julian's jaw dropped. He mumbled, "That's impossible. I never signed anything like that." But the judge merely held up the document, its legal validity unassailable. This wasn't some flimsy, hastily forged paper. This was meticulously prepared, witnessed, and legally sound. It was the first undeniable crack in their carefully constructed illusion of control. Then came the next revelation, delivered with the judge's unwavering cadence. Exhibit B. A notarized transfer of assets, detailing the full payment and transfer of ownership of the primary marital residence to Mrs. Amelia Lane, executed 6 months prior to the filing of divorce papers. Eleanor gasped, a sharp, choked sound that cut through the silence. Julian stared, his face paling, a vein throbbing in his temple. "The house?" he stammered, his voice thin with disbelief. "My house? No, that's illegal." Victoria looked at him, then at her mother, a silent accusation in her eyes. The house, the very symbol of their family's enduring wealth and his supposed generosity, had been subtly, legally, spirited away. The forced proximity of the courtroom became a crucible, melting away their arrogance, exposing their vulnerability. But the blows continued. The judge then presented Exhibit C, documentation detailing Mr. Arthur Lane's significant and strategic investment in Clear Horizons, Mrs. Lane's business, making Mrs. Lane the 70% majority owner of a highly successful cleaning and rental management company, with a current estimated valuation of $3.8 million. The impact was immediate, visceral. Julian reeled as if physically struck. His small, insignificant, charity case wife's business wasn't just a side hustle. It was a multi-million-dollar enterprise, largely owned by me. The sheer audacity of it, the quiet, meticulous planning that had gone on beneath their very noses, was a shock that ripped through their carefully cultivated worldview. Eleanor's face crumpled, her carefully applied makeup unable to conceal the horror etched in her features. Victoria's lawyer, who had been so eager to claim familial damages, now looked like a deer caught in headlights, scrambling through his notes with a frantic urgency. The courtroom, a space they had envisioned as their stage for my public humiliation, was becoming the very arena of their undoing. Arthur, sitting quietly in the gallery, simply watched, his expression serene, almost mournful. He wasn't gloating. He was merely bearing witness to a truth long overdue. His presence anchored the unfolding revelations, giving them an irrefutable weight. The familial bond they'd expected to protect Julian was now the very conduit of his downfall, through the actions of the insignificant uncle. And then came the best and most damning part. The judge's voice took on a sharper edge, a note of controlled anger. Furthermore, Exhibit D, a comprehensive financial audit revealing a pattern of fraudulent activity, specifically, multiple instances where Mr. Julian Lane took out personal loans, secured by marital assets, with documents showing he forged Mrs. Amelia Lane's signature. This was the shatter point for Julian. His face already pale, now drained completely of color. He looked like a man who had stared into an abyss and found his own reflection. Forgery was a criminal offense, not just a marital dispute. The arrogance had vanished, replaced by a raw, naked terror. Eleanor let out a small, whimpering sound, clutching her son's arm as if to physically stop the words from being spoken. Victoria stared, her mouth slightly agape, the realization of the legal peril now extending beyond a mere divorce settlement, potentially implicating the entire family. The air was thick with their unspoken panic, their desperate efforts to deny, to resist. But the evidence was irrefutable, laid bare for all to see. The judge leaned forward, her gaze piercing, unwavering, fixed solely on Julian. Her voice when she spoke was slow, deliberate, each syllable weighted with the gravity of her judgment. Mrs. Lane's current liquid account balance, she stated, enunciating each word with chilling precision, is $2.4 million. The room froze. It wasn't just a number, it was a thunderclap in their carefully controlled world, a shattering of their deepest assumptions. The charity casewife, the woman who would die broke, was a multimillionaire. Julian dropped the pen he had been idly holding, the sound a tiny clatter that echoed like a gunshot in the stunned silence. His lawyer, pale and visibly shaken, made no move to retrieve it. The judge continued, her voice now a stern, uncompromising pronouncement of justice. Mr. Lane, you are hereby ordered to repay all debts taken in your name, including those incurred through documented forgery. You are not entitled to alimony, property, or business assets from Mrs. Amelia Lane. She paused, allowing the full weight of her words to settle. Furthermore, given the evidence of fraudulent activity, this court recommends that the district attorney's office pursue criminal charges. The finality of her words hung in the air, cold and undeniable. Julian, for the first time in his life, was utterly speechless, his face a mask of utter devastation. The laughter, the smirks, the condescending whispers, all gone. All that remained was the hollow echo of their own undoing. What is the most profound lesson we can learn from facing the consequences of our own arrogance? Share your insights in the comments. The judge's gavel struck, a sharp echoing thwack that seemed to reverberate through Julian's very bones. It wasn't just a sound, it was the final, definitive punctuation mark on the ruin of his perceived future. He dropped the pen mid-signature, a useless instrument now in his trembling fingers. The tailored suit, which moments ago had been a symbol of his power, now seemed to hang limply, a costume stripped of its illusion. Eleanor and Victoria stared, not at me, but at Julian, a mix of disbelief and growing resentment clouding their features. The familial unity, forged in arrogance, was beginning to splinter under the weight of shared catastrophe. I stood up then, my movements calm, deliberate, a stark contrast to the chaos erupting around me. My voice, when I spoke, was steady, clear, imbued with a quiet power I hadn't known I possessed. I wasn't silent because I was weak, I declared, my gaze sweeping across Julian's shattered face, then briefly to Eleanor's horrified one. I was silent because I was building alone while you mocked me. Each word was a brick in the wall I had constructed, a testament to years of quiet resilience. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The truth, finally spoken aloud, carried its own irrefutable weight. And then, without another glance, without the satisfaction of witnessing their complete collapse, I turned and walked out. The heavy oak doors of the courtroom closed behind me with a soft, final sigh, sealing them in their newfound nightmare. As the elevator doors closed, Arthur, who had followed me out, placed a hand on my shoulder. His touch was gentle, reassuring. His gaze was kind, his eyes reflecting a deep wisdom. "Your kindness was never poverty," he said, his voice a low, comforting rumble. "It was discipline. Now they'll learn the cost of underestimating it." His words were a balm, an affirmation of everything I had endured, a recognition of the strength I had so long doubted in myself. For the first time I felt truly seen, truly valued, not for what I could provide, but for who I was. The drive away from the courthouse was a blur. Evelyn, my attorney, was a calm presence beside me, handling calls, deflecting media inquiries. My mind, however, kept drifting back to Arthur, to his quiet vigilance. How long had he been watching? How deep did his understanding of Julian's character and mine truly run? I realized then that his seemingly random acts of kindness, his rare visits, had been deliberate, calculated interventions, subtle yet profound. It wasn't charity he offered, but a protective shield, carefully crafted over years. That evening, I finally called Arthur. He answered on the first ring, as if he'd been expecting it. "Emilia," he said simply, his voice warm. "Arthur," I began, the words catching in my throat. I don't know how to thank you." "How did you know? Why did you do all of this?" He chuckled softly. "My dear, some things are clearer from a distance. Julian, he always had a talent for seeing only what he wanted to see, and a talent for taking shortcuts. I watched him for years, building nothing of substance, always looking for an easy way out, always believing others were beneath him. I saw how he treated you, how Eleanor encouraged it. It became clear you were in an untenable situation." He paused, a sigh whispering through the phone line. "But it wasn't just that. I saw your business, Emilia, your real business. You poured your heart into it, every detail, every client. You worked harder than anyone I knew. While Julian mocked, I saw potential. I saw integrity, and I saw something else." His voice trailed off, a hint of sadness in his tone. "What was that, Arthur?" I asked, my heart quickening. "A resemblance," he finally said, his voice quiet. "You reminded me so much of someone I loved very much, my own daughter. She had that same quiet strength, that same unwavering kindness. She was fiercely independent, just like you." A wave of unexpected emotion washed over me. Arthur rarely spoke of his family, particularly his late daughter, who had passed away tragically young. He continued, his voice softer now. "She started a small business too, with her own two hands. She faced similar dismissals, similar arrogance from people who underestimated her. When she died, too young, she left a gaping hole, and a trust fund meant for someone who embodied her spirit, someone who deserved to build something real and good." A realization dawned on me, a heavy, poignant truth. "The trust fund," I whispered. "It was hers, wasn't it? And you put my name on it." "It was always meant for someone worthy, Emilia," he confirmed. "Someone who understood the value of honest work, of a kind heart. Julian would have squandered it, as he squandered so much else. You were the obvious choice. The right choice. It was a way for her legacy to live on, through your success." Tears long suppressed finally welled in my eyes. It wasn't just about the money, or the victory in court. It was about validation, about a connection to a silent, profound legacy. It was about being seen, not as a charity case, but as the inheritor of a dream, a spirit, a quiet resilience that mirrored his own daughter's. The sealed envelope, the house, the investment in clear horizons, it wasn't just protection. It was a transfer of hope, a passing of the torch. The mystery intensified. The house they claimed was his, paid off with my mother's life insurance money. Arthur had ensured that sacred inheritance was protected, not just financially, but emotionally. He had seen the quiet desperation, the silent struggle to keep that last tangible piece of my past safe from Julian's predatory grasp. He had understood the significance of that, a bond to my own roots, my own foundation, far removed from the superficiality of the lanes. His actions were not just shrewd legal maneuvers. They were acts of profound empathy, a recognition of my hidden wounds and unspoken burdens. My connection to Arthur, once a fragile understanding, now solidified into an unbreakable bond, forged in mutual respect and a shared reverence for quiet integrity. How can a deeper understanding of someone's past motivations transform our perception of their present actions? Share your thoughts below. The revelations from Arthur about his daughter, about the sacred legacy he had quietly entrusted to me, settled deep within my heart. It wasn't just a legal victory. It was a profound emotional validation, a recognition of my inherent worth that Julian and his family had systematically denied. The tears I shed that night were not of sorrow but of release, of gratitude, a profound sense of being truly understood for the first time in years. His kindness was not fleeting charity. It was a deep-rooted empathy, born from his own silent grief. The memory of his daughter, a woman I never knew, became a silent guardian, an invisible thread weaving through my own journey. The morning after the court, a new sense of calm enveloped me. The air felt lighter. The burden I'd carried for so long finally lifted. But the peace was short-lived. Just as Arthur had predicted, Julian's family, incapable of accepting defeat, launched their counterattack. "This isn't over. I'll have that money back," his mother, Eleanor, had hissed. Her words echoed with a hollow threat, a desperate clinging to a power that had irrevocably slipped from her grasp. She had no idea what was truly coming. The day after court, she showed up at my old apartment, the modest pre-Julian place I'd returned to, with Victoria and a new, aggressive-looking lawyer. They didn't knock. They waited outside my door like debt collectors, their expressions a mix of fury and entitlement. When I stepped into the hallway, heading out for a client meeting, Eleanor folded her arms, her designer handbag clutched defensively, and spoke loud enough for my neighbors to hear. Her voice, usually carefully modulated, was shrill, trembling with barely contained rage. "You think this is finished? My son built that business. You had nothing before us." I didn't respond. I simply looked at her, then at Victoria, my expression calm, unreadable. That only made her angrier, her face contorting. Victoria, always the more volatile of the two, shoved a stack of legal-looking papers toward me. "Either you agree to renegotiate the settlement quietly," she spat, her eyes blazing, "or we take this to federal court and expose every penny you've hidden." Her lawyer stood silently beside them, a predatory gleam in his eye, clearly enjoying the spectacle. I glanced at the envelope Victoria held but didn't touch it. It was a bluff, a desperate attempt to regain control through intimidation. I knew it, and they knew I knew it. Just as I was about to calmly tell them to leave, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Evelyn, Arthur's attorney. "Do not engage. They're already being investigated. Federal charges pending." A quiet smile touched my lips. My calm was not weakness. It was an informed certainty. I looked up at Eleanor, her face flushed with fury, and just said, "Leave before you embarrass yourself further." Victoria scoffed, stepping forward, her face inches from mine. "You're not intimidating anyone. Our family still has influence." Her words were laced with a desperate hope, a refusal to see the cliff edge they were teetering on. Before I could reply, a sleek black sedan pulled up to the curb. It was nondescript, but the woman who stepped out in a tailored navy suit exuded an aura of quiet authority that instantly commanded attention. A courthouse badge was clipped to her coat, glinting in the morning light. She moved with purpose, her eyes scanning the small group before settling on me. "Mrs. Lane," she asked, her voice clear and professional. "I'm here to serve notice." Eleanor and Victoria exchanged triumphant glances, assuming the notice was for me. Their lawyer even took a step forward, anticipating a public humiliation. But the woman in navy didn't hand the documents to me. Instead, she turned, her movements precise, and extended the papers directly to Eleanor. The investigator, for that was who she was, spoke loud and clear, her voice cutting through the suddenly thick silence. "Mrs. Eleanor Lane, you are hereby summoned for fraud, coercion, and attempted asset interference in an active court ruling. You will appear in front of Judge Willis in 14 days. Victoria burst out, her voice a shriek of disbelief. "This is ridiculous. She's the problem." The investigator didn't even blink. Her gaze, cold and unyielding, fixed on Victoria. "If you speak again, I'll add obstruction of justice to your mother's summons." Eleanor's face, which had been contorted with rage, now collapsed. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her pale and sickly. Her fake confidence melted, revealing a profound terror. Victoria stood frozen, her mouth slightly agape, the legal peril now staring them directly in the face. But it got worse. The investigator continued, her voice resonating with unassailable authority. "There is also suspicion that you and your son, Julian Lane, accessed Mrs. Lane's accounts without consent during the marriage. We have signed statements, timestamps, and video evidence, including from the security cameras at your family's own bank branches." Victoria looked at her mother with wide eyes, a dawning horror in her gaze. "Mom, what did you do?" The question was whispered, laced with genuine fear and a terrible dawning realization of complicity. Eleanor, usually so quick with a sharp retort, a dismissive wave, could only stare, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. The bond of arrogance, of shared disdain for me, now fractured under the weight of self-preservation and fear. No one spoke after that. They left without another word, no threats, no smugness, no laughter. Just a quiet, desperate retreat, their carefully constructed world now crumbling around them. 2 nights later, I received another call from Evelyn, Arthur's attorney. His voice was calm, almost reflective. "We haven't even opened the second envelope he left you, Amelia. Do you want to know what's inside?" I hesitated, a strange mix of apprehension and anticipation. "Yes," I finally said, my voice barely a whisper. He read it over the phone, the words Arthur's, but his voice giving them weight. Should they ever try to come after her, remind them, the house they flaunted was bought with her mother's life insurance. The investment they mocked became their inheritance's shield, and the only legacy they'll touch is the debt they created. I didn't cry this time, but something heavy and ancient oppressive weight lifted off my chest. It wasn't just a message of legal protection, it was a testament to Arthur's profound understanding of their character, and of mine. He knew their insecurities, their blind spots, and he had meticulously prepared for every eventuality. He hadn't just helped me, he had empowered me, giving me the tools and the knowledge to stand firm. This quiet act of foresight, born from empathy and a desire for justice, cemented a bond between us that transcended legalities. It was a shared commitment to integrity, a silent promise to uphold what was right, even in the face of overwhelming opposition. In moments of conflict, what unforeseen strengths or alliances can emerge, and how do they impact our path forward? Share your thoughts below. The investigator's words, delivered with such unwavering authority, had been the definitive shatter point for the Lane family. Their retreat from my apartment building had been absolute, a humiliating scuttle rather than a triumphant exit. The image of Victoria's face, wide-eyed with the dawning horror of her mother's probable guilt, lingered in my mind. The carefully constructed facade of their family unity, built on a foundation of shared contempt for me, had not just cracked, it had imploded. Julian, unreachable, remained in the silent void of his defeat, a self-imposed exile. Victoria, after a brief, desperate call to me that I calmly redirected to Evelyn, seemingly vanished from public view, moving states to escape the fallout. Eleanor, stripped of her venomous wit and social standing, was left to face the consequences alone, her pride shattered, her influence a ghost of its former self. The 2 weeks leading up to Eleanor's hearing for fraud, coercion, and asset interference were a strange period of quiet internal reckoning for me. The initial rush of vindication had faded, leaving behind a complex tapestry of emotions. There was relief, certainly, a profound sense of justice finally served. But there was also a quiet sadness for the years lost, the emotional toll of living under their oppressive shadow. Arthur's profound kindness, born from his own grief and his daughter's legacy, now felt like a heavy mantle, a responsibility to honor the spirit of his actions. I realized that my victory wasn't just about reclaiming what was mine. It was about defining the kind of person I wanted to be in the aftermath. Would I succumb to the temptation of total destruction, or would I rise above the cycle of bitterness and resentment they had perpetuated? This was my choice, the true test of my resolve. On the day of Eleanor's hearing, the courtroom was sparsely populated. No fawning family members, no smug lawyers in tow. Julian was notably absent, unable or unwilling to face the consequences of his family's actions, which were now intrinsically linked to his own. Eleanor sat alone, a spectral figure in a simple, dark suit, her eyes downcast, her posture slumped. The once vibrant, imperious woman was reduced to a shell, her defiance replaced by a palpable, suffocating fear. Her lawyer, a different, less aggressive counsel than before, looked weary, a man resigned to an unwinnable battle. Judge Willis, the formidable black judge from my divorce hearing, presided. Her presence filled the room, a quiet but undeniable force of justice. She looked at Eleanor, her gaze unwavering, direct. "Mrs. Lane," she began, her voice steady, echoing with the memory of the previous proceeding. "You walked into my courtroom laughing the first time. Let's see if you'll leave laughing today." The words were not delivered with malice, but with a cold, clear statement of fact, a reminder of the arrogance that had preceded this inevitable fall. Eleanor's lawyer, pale and nervous, immediately requested a postponement, citing emotional distress and the complexity of the new charges. The judge denied it instantly, her hand cutting through the air with a decisive gesture. "Justice delayed is justice denied, counsel. We will proceed." Then her gaze shifted to me, a silent invitation to participate in the final act of this protracted drama. The choice was mine. Evelyn, my attorney, leaned in slightly, a subtle nod of encouragement. Arthur, sitting in the front row, his presence a quiet anchor, met my eyes with a look of unwavering support. This wasn't just about legal ramifications anymore. It was about emotional closure, about breaking the cycle of toxicity. The power was truly in my hands. I took a deep breath, the air filling my lungs with a surprising clarity. I thought of Arthur's daughter, of the legacy of quiet strength. I thought of my own journey, from the charity case wife to the woman who stood before them now. Revenge, while tempting, felt hollow. It wouldn't mend the wounds, only perpetuate them. What I truly sought was an end, a definitive closing of this painful chapter, not an opening of another. I stood, my voice calm, clear, resonating with a newfound authority. "Your Honor," I began, my gaze falling on Eleanor, who finally looked up, her eyes wide, vulnerable. "I'm not here to destroy people." The words hung in the air, a stark contrast to the destruction she and Julian had so gleefully attempted in my life. "I'm here to end the cycle." A profound silence descended upon the courtroom. The judge's expression, which had been stern, softened almost imperceptibly. She studied me for a long moment, a flicker of something akin to approval in her eyes. It was a choice rooted in strength, not weakness, a mercy born of backbone. "Mercy with backbone," she finally said, her voice thoughtful, almost reflective. "That's rare. This court appreciates your perspective, Mrs. Lane." She paused, then her gaze swept across the room, settling on Eleanor's trembling figure. "Given the plaintiff's expressed wishes, and the clear evidence presented of fraud and financial misconduct, Mrs. Lane, the court will proceed with a civil judgment for restitution of all funds and refer the criminal forgery charges to the DA, but will take Mrs. Lane's willingness to move forward into consideration regarding further punitive actions." Then, with a final, resonant bang of her gavel, she declared, "Court adjourned." The sound was an echo, a powerful resonance of the central event in Act 2, but transformed. It was no longer the sound of a verdict against me, but a symphony of liberation. My ex-husband, Julian, never showed his face in court again. The weight of his own misdeeds, now laid bare and legally binding, was enough to send him into a deeper, self-imposed exile. I heard rumors of him struggling financially, his arrogance having finally caught up with his lack of genuine substance. My ex-sister-in-law, Victoria, having moved states, attempted no further contact, the shame and legal threat a powerful deterrent. And his mother, Eleanor, she went silent. The kind of silence that only comes after reality finally collects its bill, when all the bluster and all the lies have been stripped away, leaving only the stark, undeniable truth. There were no more threats, no more smug pronouncements, no more laughter. Just the quiet, chilling realization that the charity case wife, the one they mocked, had not only built her own empire but had also found the strength to forgive, even as she demanded justice. The cycle of their malice had broken, not by matching their cruelty, but by choosing a path of profound, quiet strength and unshakable integrity. The unexpected love, the quiet bond with Arthur, had shielded me, empowered me, and ultimately set me free. When faced with the opportunity for revenge, what does it truly mean to end the cycle rather than perpetuate it? Share your deepest thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Thanks for stopping by today. See you tomorrow.